Good evening, welcome to my channel. My name's Gavin Boyter. I'm a writer of short stories and Running Coyote and Fallen Star is my collection of short stories, which is available for about $6.99 or even less on Amazon. I mean, that's probably less than you'll pay for any other book of that length in a normal bookshop. It's amazing, really. How can I do it? So anyway, I've written another story. But this one is not based on random words. It was going to be, and I'll confess I was tempted to cheat in that I came up with a selection of words and I had an idea that I'd already thought of many years ago but not written, and I thought, well, actually these words would fit the story, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. The words themselves are supposed to generate the story. So even though I started with the idea in mind of inserting those words into the story, there was no purpose to it. There was no point in doing so. So I think the only word out of the 5 that came up that made it into the story was the word Earthmen. Bit of a weird word. Anyway, hopefully it will make sense. But this is just a story that I've had for a while, but never written. So fortunately today I managed to get my act together and write it. I don't know if you can hear the sound of that plane. It's a bit annoying, but we'll struggle through. So this is story number 125. And it's called The Empathy Ball. So much noise. Zarthur was in trouble. He'd been caught on a foraging expedition at least 20 minutes from his ship, and Earthmen had him surrounded. At least he'd managed to duck behind a tree in the park before the worst of them, led by the corpulent, pock-marked-cheeked 15-year-old Byron, saw him. At least that's what Zarthur hoped. Whilst so hidden, Zarthur was watching a column of ants carrying leaves, twigs, and what looked like pieces of crinkle-cut crisp towards their distant nest, hidden in the roots of a nearby tree. He imagined himself a giant, and the ants, his robot army, ferrying replacement components for his damaged ship. "Hurry up," whispered Zarthur. "We need to leave this stinking planet before dinner time. Fail me and I'll explode you with my death ray." Zarthur, real name Trevor, was unnaturally small and spindly for a 12-year-old, a result of growth abnormalities caused by his premature birth. Of course, at Trevor's school, any sign of physical weakness would be seized upon by the likes of Byron, the pretentiously named bully who ruled the schoolyard of Middlewich High. One of the ants had dropped his piece of crisp and was struggling to pick it up, while other ants relentlessly clambered over it. "That won't do," thought Trevor/Zarthur, getting out a plastic magnifying glass he'd pulled off the front of a comic in the corner shop. A shaft of sunlight projected onto the patch of ground before him, enough light to focus to a sharp point. Trevor levelled his death ray on the crisp, pleased to see its surface beginning to brown under the pinpoint of searing light he'd made. Ants panicked and scattered in all directions, except the worker who'd salvaged the crisp, who valiantly tried to yank it away. Another gleam of light momentarily distracted Trevor from his overlord cruelty, a silvery gleam from the bushes as afternoon sunlight found the edge of something spherical and metallic. It was around the size of a football and etched with intricate maze-like patterns. Dropping his magnifying glass and making sure Byron and his mates were still sitting on the concrete ping-pong table by the toilets, blithely unaware of him, Trevor crept to pick up this strange artifact. Remarkably, it was icy to the touch. It also tinkled slightly, like it contained millions of pieces of light bulb glass. Then something weird happened. Trevor felt his consciousness shatter into 1,000 tiny pieces, dwindle and diminish. Suddenly he was squinting through compound eyes over a complex rutted surface filled with giant logs, the green stems of spear-like trees, and huge cliffs of dried mud. Worst of all, his compatriots were rushing around him, ignoring him as he desperately tried to pull his prize, enough food to feed the queen for many moons, from the forest floor. Trevor was an ant. Or strictly speaking, he was all the ants, but had chosen this little worker insect as his vessel. Now, what was that massive brown smooth boulder descending before him? "Oi, shrimp! What you got there?" Trevor dropped the silvery ball and it rolled to the base of a tree. The sphere bounced over the column of ants, crushing none of them, which gave Trevor a jolt of relief, even as his consciousness reassembled itself and slotted itself back into his cranium. "Nothing," he muttered dully, hoping he could bore his nemesis into leaving. Trevor could see Byron's gang assembling behind him. One tall lad with vivid ginger hair kicked a mass of twigs and leaves into his face. Trevor coughed out pieces of sycamore seed. Byron tutted as if Trevor had somehow disappointed him. The older boy pushed Trevor onto his back and kneeled on his chest, his 12.5 stone compressing Trevor's ribs, while he reached across towards the ball. Trevor noticed that Byron sported a fading black eye, perhaps explaining why he'd not been at school all week. Then, fearing the inevitable, Trevor screwed his eyes shut. "Byron, I can't breathe," he gasped, hyping up his discomfort while Byron's acolytes giggled. Then something bizarre happened. Trevor still had his eyes shut, knowing that a punch or kick would be coming soon, as it always did. Instead, he felt the pressure of his enemy's knees lift from his chest. When Trevor opened his eyes, Byron was standing, holding the ball, staring at his aghast posse, tears streaming down his face. The rest of the gang looked at their leader with mingled expressions of bafflement and dismay. Byron turned to Trevor, offering a hand to help him up, his voice choked with emotion. As Trevor grasped the stubby hand of his erstwhile foe, Byron half-mouthed, half-muttered the most extraordinary sentence Trevor had ever heard him speak. "Mate, I'm sorry." When Byron got home that evening at 7 o'clock, after telling his gang that he wouldn't be hanging out with them anymore and recommending they each apologise to Trevor, he went straight to the bathroom to wipe the spittle off his face. He couldn't believe Roddy had gobbed at him, but understood how confusing his sudden change of heart must have seemed. He had it coming. And in any case, Roddy was still confused about his sexuality. Some of the girls had started calling him the Ginger Gaylord. Byron placed the ball by the kitchen sink as he washed his face and dried it with his shirt. He'd have used the tea towel by the drying rack, but his mum worked so hard to get all the laundry done, and tea towels weren't for faces, as she often told him. Byron caught his own reflection in the side of the kettle, saw that his shiner was still lividly visible, evidencing his stepfather's short temper. In that moment, perhaps serendipitously, Byron's stepdad, Barry, stumbled in the back door, having sneaked up the passage between the houses. Barry wasn't with Mary, Byron's mum. I suppose he left her down the pub again, Barry thought. He tried to get her to come home from her post-work midweek binges several times. Now he just joins her for a bit, Barry realised, and leaves her to it. Probably thinks it's the best compromise. "Weren't you supposed to be making the dinner?" were Barry's first words to his stepson, who he punched with attempted jocularity in the shoulder. Byron didn't have a response. He knew he was in the wrong and would normally have brazened it out or told the red-eyed, multiply tattooed plumber where to get off. "I asked you a question, boy," said Barry, lurching closer. There was a strong whiff of hops about him. He'd evidently drunk more than Byron thought was possible in the couple of hours since he finished work. "Maybe I can get something together," said Byron, reaching for the fridge. "Damn right you can," said Barry, eyeing up the silver sphere, which Byron realised he'd been unconsciously hiding behind his body. "What in the name of—" Barry stopped mid-expletive, having picked up the ball with one meaty hand. On the back of his knuckles was written WHFC, the initials of his team. Barry now stared fixedly at his stepson, which stopped Byron in his tracks as he dropped a box of eggs and a packet of bacon on the counter. Was he about to hit Byron again? "Boy, did I do that?" said Barry in a tremulous voice. Byron for a moment couldn't figure out what his stepdad was referring to until one of the old man's paws reached tentatively for his face. Was that me?" Byron nodded, knowing that anything vocal would be too hurtful. "I'm a horrible piece of shit," Barry said quietly, as if realising a deep truth for the first time. "And your mum's drinking ain't your fault neither." Byron realised that the ball must have done to Barry what it had done to him. Byron now felt things more deeply. Things he'd pushed deep inside had bubbled up to the surface, like sweat escaping the long blocked pores. "Come here, lad." Byron felt a little queasy, even though he knew he wanted what was coming. It was so weird, and yet so suddenly necessary. Barry wrapped his arms around his stepson and started sobbing on his shoulder. Byron felt the man's unshaven cheek irritating his own and the pressure of his bulk against Byron's not inconsiderable stomach. After an awkward moment, Byron patted Barry's back like a wrestler tapping out, and the two released one another. Barry's eyes fell upon the ball, which he still clasped in one hand. It's the craziest thing, he said, but I need to go back to the pub and talk to your mother. She was trying to explain about her boss, that Scandi woman, and I wasn't listening. Mary worked for a Swedish woman, Christina, who ran a cleaning firm of mostly Bangladeshi and Indian women. She regularly docked her employees' wages for being late, then forced them to make up any lost time at the weekend. She also paid less than minimum wage, and when her staff complained, asked them if they'd like to be replaced with Poles and Ukrainians. "Good idea, Dad," said Byron, using the familial pronoun for the first time. Barry swallowed emotionally, wiping moisture from his eye with a hand upon which was written the letters M, A, R, and Y. Byron looked at the tattooed knuckles, suddenly understanding the pain and determination that small act of devotion must have entailed. "You're coming too, lad," said Barry. "I'm going to buy you a first pint. Well, maybe half a shandy. Can't have the White Horse losing its licence." Byron grabbed for his hoodie, then picked up the silvery orb. "Should I bring the space ball?" Barry nodded. "Absolutely. Reckon your mum should take that to work." So there you have it, the empathy ball. Now, I did consider extending the story. Maybe you can tell me what you think. I was going to have this continue so that, originally I was going to have Barry gives it to his boss, and then his boss gives it to the local MP, and the local MP gives it to the Prime Minister, or something like that. And everyone has empathy for the person underneath them. But I thought it works better if, you get the gist. You know what's going to happen every time this ball is passed on to another person. So anyway, let me know if you think that was the right place to stop the story, and what you thought of it generally. And I will be back with another video very soon. Bye.